Now I'd like to switch into another controversial topic, this issue of police killings in the United States. Now, this kind of refers back to the article I was talking about, or the article that I wrote that I didn't really get a chance to talk about. But I'd like to delve more into this issue of race versus class and how we understand issues like this. Now, I argue in my article that although, of course, race is highly important, most people do not have a good understanding of how class plays out in the United States. And I think that that is true. But you can't reduce to one or the other. You really have to understand both. And this is sort of a breakdown of a debate that occurred between two left wing, socialist news sources. One, the World Socialist website; the other, Glenn Ford, who's the founder of the Black Agenda report. And I'm sort of, recreating the debate here, which will allow us to sort of, analyze better to what extent do racial and class dynamics play in the very serious problem of police killings here in the United States. And I think when you look at the data, you have to conclude that both class and race matter a lot. Okay, so, and I'll include links to these articles at the end. So as a result, so this is from the World Socialist website, which wants to argue that class more than race matters in the phenomenon of police killings in the United States. And they provide data to support this, data that they've taken from other sources like the Washington Post, the Guardian, the Fatal Encounter Survey. And they basically compiled this data in a three-part series of articles. Once again, just sort of breaking it down into bullet points here. But I think there are some important takeaways which people should know. So they say blacks are 2.24 times more likely to be killed by police than whites. So there you go. I mean, that should tell you right away the racial dynamics matter more than anything else. But there's a little bit more of a nuanced picture when you go into it a little bit. But they say killings are concentrated in 25% of the US, what they dub police killing zones. So police killings only basically happen in about 25% of the United States. So three-fourths of the country basically don't see any killings by police at all. The police don't kill anybody that lives in about 75% of the United States. These are all highly concentrated in just 25% of the United States. So within what they call the killing zone, the demographic breakdowns are 18%, 18.6% black, 26.7% Hispanic versus the rest of the United States. Poverty rate, almost 20% in these areas versus 9.5% nationally. So much higher poverty exists in these areas. So you see already how the dynamics of class and race both play a role. These are areas where the poverty rate is much higher, but also you have a higher Black and Hispanic population in these areas than in the rest of the United States. They also show that 50% of killings occur in rural areas, which are majority white. So they argue that people tend to disproportionately focus on killings by police in urban areas and neglect what happens in rural areas. In states like Alabama and Mississippi, police kill whites and blacks at rates matching their population change. So they kill at basically the same rate relative to their population as a whole, which they argue indicates no racial bias. Again, so I'm going to provide the important data presented by the World Socialist website and then try to comment on that data. But it's good, first of all, I think, to take all this stuff in. Again, I would also remind people that these PowerPoint slides are available for your reference. So if it might seem like there's a lot of information here, I encourage people to download these things and read them on their own time and sort of take it in more. There'll probably be some things that kind of skip over to just in the interest of keeping things moving along. But again, this is for your reference, so you can look at this when you want as well. So again, key findings from the 2017 data compiled by the Washington Post, the Guardian, and Fatal Encounters survey. So first you get the national demographics overall. So the U.S. population in 2016 was about 60% white, 61% almost, non-Hispanic white, as they say, 13.4% black, 18.1% Hispanic. The median household income of 55,322. As you can see, it's gone up in the last few years, but this is where it was at that time, with a poverty rate of about 12%. Police killings in 2017. Total, they say 987 shot dead by police. Now, by race, 48% were white, 475 people. So that might give some people pause, think, well, actually, almost half of all the people killed by the police were actually white people. But this is where the element of uh, uh, proportionality comes into play. Proportional to the population as a whole. So you see 48% of people killed by the police were white. Well, whites make up almost 61% of the population. So that is not proportional to the population as a whole. Proportional would mean basically that the number of people killed by police would roughly match the proportion of the population as a whole. So for whites, it's underrepresented. For blacks, though, 23% of people killed by 23% of people killed by the police were black. So that's disproportionately higher, right? Because blacks only make up about 13% of the population overall. So a 10% increase, basically. Hispanics, 21%. So also slightly disproportionately higher as well. That's where that term, disproportional comes from. And that's why it's important to keep in mind that. 95% of them were male. And you can see the other breakdowns here. Native Americans, 2.5% of killings versus 1.3% of the population. Asians, 1.9% of killings versus 5.8% of the population as well. Now to sort of adjust for these population disparities, it's complicated by the fact that, again, white people make up about 60% of the population as a whole. So how do you kind of smooth out those differences in population? A lot of people use this per 100,000 metric, which I'm not going to, explain exactly how it works. It can be a bit, technical, but the basic idea is that it sort of smooths out the population differences. So if you look at the standard death rates per 100,000 people, so how many people die per 100,000 people? Whites, you can see here, 0.237, black 0.530, Hispanic 0.358. This gives you the ratio. Again, blacks are, again, more than 2 times more likely to be shot by the police, and Hispanics slightly higher as well. So again, they define more this police killing zone, which they also refer to as USA minus or USA negative or whatever that's supposed to mean. A definition, where areas where police killings occurred, cities and counties throughout the United States. The population in the killing zone, as they call it, is 91 million people. Again, 27% of the U.S. population. 73% of the U.S. basically had no police killings at all. Now, you break down, so you're now looking at a smaller subset of the United States as a whole, which they argue is an important thing to do. You can't just look at nationwide because throughout most of the nation, the police aren't killing anybody. You have to really look at the areas where most of these police killings occur. So the demographic in what they call, the killing zone, very, chilling terminology here, is 44.5% white, 18.6% black, 26.7% Hispanic. So you can see that those population disparities shrink a little bit, whereas whites make up about 60% of the population as a whole, they only make up about 45% of the population in what they call the killing zone. Median household income is a lot lower, 52,000 versus 55,000. The poverty rate is much higher in these killing zones as well. So it's quite clear that these killings mostly occur in lower income, impoverished areas. Move my thing around. Okay, here. So what the World Socialist website finds is that when you account for this killing zone area or areas, and basically what you're doing now is focusing on poor blacks and poor whites, the death rate narrows in a fairly significant way. So where it's 2.24 times nationally, in the killing zone area, as they call it, it's 1.16 times more likely for blacks to be killed than whites. So it's a narrowing. There's still a discrepancy, though, and that is part of the key point here. So this is the World Socialist website's best attempt to show you that class matters more than race. But even when you account for class, even when you isolate, to lower income sections of the population, you still see the poorer blacks die more often or get killed more often by police than poorer whites. Although the difference between the two does, narrow in a fairly significant way too. Um, and the reason for that is because, now you're not just looking at 60% of the white population, you're looking at, 45% of the white population living in more lower income areas. Um, again, medium household income for whites and blacks and Hispanics living in these areas is roughly similar. Actually, Hispanics actually have a higher median household income in these uh, killing zone area. Poverty rates are roughly similar as well. And I have an urban versus rural breakdown. White victims made up, the majority of deaths in rural areas. 292, they say, versus 149 black deaths in rural areas. This is another key statistic that they focus in on. Again, I know there's a lot of information here. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but this is here for your reference if you want to focus on it more. Again, half of all killings basically occur in rural areas rather than cities, which they define as metro areas, large cities, and small cities. So basically, half of all these killings occur basically in rural areas. So again, so now let's get some commentary on this. So again, Black Americans are basically more than two times more likely to be killed by police than white Americans. The World Socialist website acknowledges this, but argue it's misleading because killings are hyper concentrated, they say, in specific areas, what they call, again, the killing zones. Critics like Glenn Ford, the founder of Black Agenda report, argues this downplays systemic um, racism. Even if killings are localized, the fact that Black people are overrepresented in these zones reflects historic segregation over policing. Um, Again, only 25% of the US population lives in areas where police killings occur. These zones are poor and more racially uh, diverse. The World Socialist website uses this to argue that class, not race, is the primary factor since poverty is higher across races in these zones. Critics, again, like Ford, counter that poverty doesn't explain why Black people are still killed at higher rates even within these zones. So again, even when you account for poverty, there's still a higher rate of Black people being killed in these areas than white people being killed in these areas, even though the difference does narrow significantly when you sort of isolate, poorer whites with poorer blacks rather than looking at white people as a whole, because more white people tend to be, disproportionately, middle income or higher. So when you look at, basically a subset of poor white people, there is a narrowing of that difference. But, and this is, I would say, the decisive factor here, even accounting for that, there's still a higher rate at which Black people are killed than even among poor whites. So what else could that be? How else do you explain that other than racism? That's why you have to look at both class and race. Areas where these killings occur, like for example, in St. Louis, are often legacies of redlining, segregation, targeted policing. 50% of police killings happen in rural areas, mostly white, while urban killings get more attention. In southern states like Alabama and Mississippi, police kill whites and blacks at rates matching their population shares. The World Socialist website frames this as proof that race isn't a factor in many areas. Critics, again, like Ford, argue rural white deaths are tragic but distinct. They often involve mental health crises or drug-related calls, while urban black deaths frequently stem from routine policing, traffic stops, things like that. Statistical no bias doesn't mean equal treatment. Black communities are policed more aggressively for minor offenses, increasing lethal encounters. So basically, what they're saying here is that the circumstances leading to these police killings are often different, where many black deaths stem from basically routine things like traffic stops and things like that. Even to just focus only on killings themselves kind of distorts the picture a little bit because it neglects to take into account more sort of routine forms of harassment. Again, pulling people over for traffic offenses, stop and frisk, things like that, false arrests, things like that. That when you factor those things as well, that also sort of increases the argument that race plays a significant, if not the decisive role in this. Although again, class matters as well, obviously. Inside killing zones, the black white death ratio drops from 2.24 times to 1.16 times. Hispanics are killed less than expected, meaning relative to their population as a whole, even in these areas. World Social Website claims this shows class matters more than race. Again, critics would respond 1.16 times is still an over representation expressed as a percentage. Again, what it means is black people are still 16 times more likely to be killed by whites in these zones. So when you look at it that way, it sounds more significant. Although again, it does narrow down a little bit when you look at when you focus on lower income groups. They also argue Hispanic under representation may reflect reporting gaps or cultural avoidance of police. So they think that there's less instances where these cases may be reported overall. Both black and white victims live in similar poverty. Rural white victims are just as poor as urban black victims. Again, World Socialist website proves class unity is needed. Poverty impacts race differently. Black poverty is criminalized. Broken windows, policing. This idea of prosecuting people for many minor crimes, something embraced by Rudolph Giuliani, for example, and many others. While white poverty, they say, is medicalized. Opioid crisis treated as a health issue. I think maybe push back on that one a little bit, because even in the previous slide, which again I'm just sort of breaking down what's been argued here, it does argue that many of the white deaths stem from mental health crises and opioid, which are often brought on by opioid addiction and things like that. So if you're a poor white person going through a mental health crisis, there's still a pretty good chance that you're going to get killed by the police, basically. Maybe push back on that one a little bit. But again, I think when you crunch the numbers here, I mean, basically, I think the argument, you can't come to any other conclusion, basically, than race is playing a factor. Even if you focus, basically on poor groups within the United States, poor whites, poor blacks, there's still a greater tendency for poor blacks to get killed by the police than for poor whites, even if that difference is shrunk somewhat. So how can you account for the fact, if you're trying to scientifically explain why do poor blacks still die more often from the police than poor whites, and you've already accounted for class, and you see that their class levels roughly, equal to each other in terms of income and things like that, then what else could it be other than racism on the part of the police? Rural areas have shockingly high death rates for all races. World Socialist website blames economic devastation. Critics agree rural policing is brutal, but note rural black people still die at higher rates than rural whites. Urban black deaths spark movements because they reflect generational racial terror, not just poverty. So there you go. I've included links to the articles here where you can read these if you want. I think it's well worth reading. Glenn Ford unfortunately died in 2021. He's the founder of Black Agenda Report. I would certainly, encourage people to go back, read this article, also, go through his archive of articles and read a lot of things that he writes now, as well as check, contemporary articles written by the Black Agenda Report. I like the columns of John Jeter. I read his articles often. They are very good. So are many other contributors there. The World Socialist website also very, very good as well. Very good as far as like a daily news site that provides pretty up-to-date coverage on major news stories, not just in the United States, but across the world, from a Marxist point of view. So that's it. So I'm pretty much going to wrap things up here. Look forward to any questions that people might have. So that's it. So, okay, take care, everyone.